And keeping with the education, and the United States International University, USIU, will be hosting a data conference. And we are now joined by Dr. Paul Okanda, the Director for ICT at USIU Africa, and Alex Twino-Mugisha, who is the General Manager at Intel Corporation East Africa. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Perhaps let me just kick it off with Dr. Okanda. What are your views on the KCPE results? And perhaps as a country, we've been trying to use technology in the marking of exams and, of course, ensuring the integrity of exams. What's your view on this?
I think, first of all, I must congratulate all the kids for a job well done. I've followed news, and what I've heard is that there's an improvement in performance from the top candidate downwards compared to last year. I think the integrity has certainly improved. We hear about being Kenya, you know about all the things that happened with exams. But I think this year, more than any other year, I think the ministry, alongside NEC, have worked really, really hard to be able to achieve what they have.
All right.
The use of technology, as was mentioned earlier, has cut across the board, right from ensuring the integrity in the process, but also in terms of ensuring that the marking has happened in record time. I think that's what we've had so far, and that is just commendable. I think we're getting there.
All right. And, of course, the technology man from Intel. What's your view on this?
I think I echo Dr. Ari's comments. One of the things that technology can do is make life much easier, and you see how fast it's taken to mark the papers. That means kids can actually get to school earlier next year. So that's all positive. I think there's a lot more that technology can do in education in terms of actually improving results and outcomes. And you've seen the government has been investing in that area. So we look forward to seeing results, improved results as a result of using technology.
All right. Well, let's switch gears now and talk about the upcoming data conference. And I just want to understand the context around this, bearing in mind the future of data is becoming quite interesting, bearing in mind that companies are now considering data analytics. And of course, big data is the next big headache for companies. Perhaps we can kick it off from you, Dr.
Yeah. I think we've come a long way with the Industrial Revolution. If you look back many years ago, we started off with, mechanization. That was a big thing then. So in the textile industry in Britain, if you remember, in the 18th century, you talked about the use of steam engines and that kind of thing. Moved on to a second industrial revolution, and in that, it was so much more mechanization. So Henry Fords and assembly lines that did all the assembly for the equipment they put together.
Yes.
We had the third industrial revolution, and that was then around using digital technology. So when we talk things like robotics, when we talk things like using technology to enable things happen much more efficiently and better, that was there. Now we've moved on to what we're calling, in my view, the fourth industrial revolution. And for me, that fourth industrial revolution is driven mainly by that explosion in data. I mean, a student of mine did a piece the other day, and what he was talking about was that daily now we talk about 2.5 quintillion. That's 2.5 times 10 to the power 6 bytes of data generated on a daily basis. That is daily I'm talking about, Abby. So
Interesting.
It tells you where we're heading to.
Sure.
And so for us, big data is the new oil. It's what everyone's trying to get, to try and mine and get all sorts of insights, all sorts of modeling, all sorts of forecasting, all sorts of experiments, all sorts of research. It's the big thing.
All right. And I know Intel is at the center of all this. Perhaps, Mugisha, walk us through how data is becoming a key component, and of course expound for us the HPC model that will be also being a key issue at the conference.
Yeah, sure. So let me first start by, Dr. Ari has talked about the explosion of data and all the implications for life and research. But let me focus on the HPC part. So HPC is nothing but a really big computer that can crunch a lot of data in a very short time. So, a typical computer, think about having thousands, in some cases millions of those computers working together in parallel to solve some of humanity's greatest challenges. So I'll give you an example, the genome sequencing, when they sequence the human genome.
Yeah.
15 years ago when that work started, it took, hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases $1 billion, I think there are studies that show that. Took several weeks, if not months. Today, they can sequence your entire genome for $1,000
Wow.
and less in a few days, right? So this is possible because of the advance in this massive parallel computing that we call high-performance computing.
All right. And I remember that technology continues to improve in terms of capacity. And like Dr. you did mention, I remember reading an article in The Economist saying that oil is no longer the precious commodity in the world, it's now data. And looking at this particular conference, what will be some of the key issues up for discussion as we interrogate new aspects around like the HPC and more innovations coming along with data?
Right. I think this conference is a culmination of quite a few months, if not a year or so, of hard work. This all started off with the Harvard conference that was sometime in March. And this was held there, attracting the big, government policymakers, ministers across Africa. And the topic for that conference was really what role diaspora can play in revitalizing higher education in Africa. And so part of the brainstorming that went on, part of the resolution that came out of this conference was that Africa needed to embrace platforms that would enable us to do research and do innovation.
Yes.
Across the continent. As you know, there's a huge gap at the moment against other continents. And so out of that, we then, as USIU, decided to partner with Intel. And they were at the conference as well, the Harvard conference. We decided to partner with Intel and the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. And what we decided to do then was say, how do we investigate this? How do we come around to try and understand what we need to do to ensure we narrow this gap that there is, so we can harness what potential there is in these platforms to enable us to bridge this gap that exists between Africa and the rest of the world.
All right.
And so a culmination of that was we sat together, we decided we needed to put together heads and minds around this. And so as we went around several meetings later, we decided we needed to host a conference. That was the best way to go about it. Get minds together, brainstorm, ask all the questions, and try and come up with a few resolutions if that was okay. And so with Intel and Cardiff, the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, we heard about the UNEP conference that's coming up. And so we then co-opted UNEP and got accreditation with them that now allows us to investigate other issues around the use of data.
Sure.
As you know, big data cuts across.
Correct.
From government in policy making, from the private sector in terms of modeling and getting that competitive edge that allows them to develop new products, right through to education when you talk about research, right through to your NGOs and around making decisions around what to do with some data that they've collected over years.
Sure.
We thought it might be a good idea to bring this together, and that's what we're hoping to do.
All right. And Tina Mogisha, looking at the trends across the world, there's a higher appreciation of data by companies, and companies are trying to have this as an important unit in organizations, even some setting up an office in relation to chief information officer. Perhaps from where we sit, how prepared are corporates in relation to data and planning around it and using it to gain a competitive edge in the marketplace?
You're right that there is an increasing focus on data because everybody's realized, both corporates and, by the way, governments, that data gives you a competitive edge. Data on its own really is not very useful. It's what you do with that data.
Correct.
That's useful. It's you need to derive insights. You need to derive trends. So if you can derive further insights than your competitors, that gives you a competitive edge, right? And this is where HPC plays a very big role because if you have a lot of data, you need this massive computing power to actually crunch that data. IDC, which is an industry consulting firm, looked at HPC, the impact of the return on investment on HPC across the world. And they say that for every dollar invested in HPC, the return is about $515, right?
Wow.
So that's a massive return on investment, and so companies and governments are making these investments to stay competitive.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we have to wrap it up at that juncture, but we'll definitely be revisiting this topic as the conference nears, and we really are grateful for you coming and to share with us your insights into this all-important topic around the future of data. Well, I've been speaking there to Dr. Paul Okanda, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of ICT at United States International University for Africa. And we also had with us Alex Twino Mugisha, who is the General Manager at Intel Corporation, just breaking it down for us and telling you why the HPC is something you need to consider investing in terms of